So welcome to Elite Business on Demand, and wherever you're joining us from, we're very thrilled to have you here with us today. And I'm very excited to be joined by one of Britain's most successful philanthropists, the Mr. John Caudwell. So John, welcome. Thanks very much for taking the time to speak to Elite.
Pleasure, Scott.
And we should also mention this point, John has recently released his autobiography, Love, Pain and Money, The Making of a Billionaire, which is the inside story of how John Caudwell became a billionaire throughout his personal obstacles, which is a really thrilling and exciting read. And also all proceeds from the book do go directly to John's charity, Caudwell Children. And we recommend that you collect a copy, which you will be able to from a link below this article. So John, once again, great to have you here, and I'm going to kick off straight into our first question, which I'm sure you've been addressed quite a few times recently, which is why now with the book? Why did you feel it was the right time to release this?
Well, it was solely as a result of the pandemic, actually. When the pandemic hit in March, I suddenly found myself with no weddings, no birthday parties, no charity events, no ability to travel to business meetings, and no holidays. So life got severely curtailed, and I found myself for the first time for 50 years with days when I had only got a limited amount of things to do, and my days not packed with 16 hours of work. And it was a shock. It was a complete and utter shock. I might add, it was a shock that I actually subsequently came to enjoy, because I'd worked so hard and so long for so many years. It was a habit, not a habit. It was necessary because of all the interests I got. But anyway, suddenly I thought, well, people have been asking me to do an autobiography for 40 years, and I've never had the time. And why not? So I contacted my autobiographer, Louise Gannon, and the rest is history. But incidentally, could I just plug that people should buy the book? I really think they'll find it inspirational, but the charity donation, of course, is a secondary part of that. It's not the main reason for buying it, because most people tell me it's an amazing read. I hope anybody that does buy it finds the same thing. But if it is an amazing read, what a great Christmas present to get for people, because it's only £15 or on Amazon, or it's $18.99 list. And what a cheap Christmas present to give for people that they might find actually helps them in life and changes their life in some way. So they ought to go out and buy 10 copies and have the Christmas present sold.
Absolutely, and what a great start to the year that will be. If they read that over the festive period. And John, you're very excited about it, obviously. How did you find the whole process of writing and getting it all together?
Unbelievably emotional, because Louise was an incredibly probing writer. She was digging into every aspect of my life from childhood right the way through. She enabled me to dredge up memories that are long since really forgotten, buried and dealt with. And we were both in tears many, many times throughout me telling the story and of course the subsequent editing. So it was an absolute emotional roller coaster. And what became really obvious was my life was full of love, full of pain, and full of money. And hence the title. When we were wondering what to call the book, there were, you could come up with 1,000 titles, but the thing that stood out is the pain, the love, and the money. So that's what it became. And Piers Morgan the other day on an interview I did with him said, well, which was the most part of that? Was it love, pain, or money? And I said, well, probably pain, because I'm a bit of a masochist.
Excellent. I mean, it's a very honest account. And how do you feel the aspect of that has been received? Have you had any feedback so far?
Well, everybody that's read it says it's amazing. Most people give me feedback are people that are friends, and they're staggered by the inside story of my life that they had no concept of. But they're also potentially a bit biased because they know me and they're friends, and and so I think they'd want to please me. But I've not had anybody say it's anything less than a really good read. So I hope that it is, and I hope that it goes on to sell many tens of thousands and raises a lot of money for Caudwell children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was a fantastic read, very emotional, and such an incredible journey. And it sounds like obviously a tough childhood. How did that inform your approach to business and life generally later on?
Well, I've always said in my speeches that a tough childhood is a great precursor to a successful life. When you've got huge challenges in life, it does one of two things. It scars you and leaves you damaged, or it makes you stronger. And I was in a meeting with Lord Shinkwin the other day, and he's got an illness called brittle bone disease, which is a real challenge for him, dreadful challenge. And we were talking about charity because we were both speaking last night at the Fortune Forum in the House of Lords. And we were talking about charity, but we also then talked about what makes you stronger and more determined. And he said without doubt that his illness as a child and current illness made him a fighter, because he had to fight to survive. And in many respects, although I didn't have that health challenge in life, I had to fight to survive. And I think when you learn to fight to survive, it's a skill for the rest of your life, and it stands you in good stead. So I think born with a silver spoon in your mouth is actually quite a disadvantage. You might have other advantages like network of people that are connected, and it might get you success in other ways. But in terms of being a fighter to succeed solely in your own right, I think being born into a difficult environment is not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you feel that that helped you as part of your journey then, being that fight to carry on and continue for all the different ventures that you went through?
Yeah, I absolutely do. But I also ought to stress that I wouldn't advocate it for people, because a lot of people are damaged by a difficult upbringing and could be scarred and damaged for life. So, in an ideal world, that would never happen. But if it does happen and you rise above it, then it can make you extremely strong and more successful as a consequence.
Okay. And interesting enough, in terms of your involvement, I mean, how successful do you think you've been in influencing governments on business policy?
Nowhere near as successful as I would have liked to have been. Caudwell pandemic recovery was a no-brainer when I introduced it to the government in March 2020. I have been unsuccessful to get them to do it, but I think that's in principle because governments are very, very poor at investing in Britain's future. What they're good at is playing about round the edges and playing about in a way that really doesn't produce the right result. And Rishi made a massive mistakes during his tenure as Chancellor. Those mistakes we're paying the price for now. I'm fully behind Rishi now because he is the Prime Minister and I want him to be successful. I desperately hope he's more successful as a Prime Minister than he was as a Chancellor. But, I didn't influence enough. And the only influence I really can properly quantify is probably two things. One is the bounce back loans where Rishi he guaranteed the banks 80% of the loan that they made to people in the businesses in the COVID crisis. And they had to find the other 20% equity. And I had an argument on a Wednesday night, 8 till 8:30 with him. You could call it a debate or an argument, but we had the argument, debate. And I said, you've got to give 100% certainty to those banks, because otherwise they won't make the loan, because an entrepreneurial businessman growing his business or struggling in his business has not got 20% equity to give to the banks that the banks would find acceptable. So it's never going to work. Businesses will go out of business and your plan will not work. We had that debate for half an hour. we had all sorts of discussions around that. Could the UK balance sheets afford it? And I said, you can't afford not to afford it. You have to protect British business. You have to. There's no option. Anyway, we ended in disagreement. And I should say, incidentally, you know, Rishi was very polite, very complimentary to me because of all my charity work. It was a very amicable meeting, but quite a forceful one. When I say meeting, it was over Zoom, of course, because we're in the height of the pandemic. So it was amicable, but forceful on both parts. Yeah. And I left it. I said, look, you need to think about this because you are going to fail. It has to be changed. Yeah. And that's how we left it. And he never said anything else. And then on the Monday morning, he did change it. So, you know, I was very pleased about that. I was less pleased that he didn't really have the courtesy to text me and say, thanks for that conversation. It was quite useful and I've changed my mind. You know, it struck me as being very arrogant and, you know, impolite, really. I mean, if I'd have had that debate with anybody on the planet and I'd have ended up doing what they suggested, I'd have said, oh, thanks for that. You know, my mind was closed. You opened my mind and it was benefit to society. Thank you, you know. And so I was a bit disappointed in him as a human being in that way, but more disappointed about the mistakes he made. But so that's one way. The second way that I influenced, but not enough, was that with Caudwell Pandemic Recovery, which was really the centerpiece of that. There was 4 parts to it, but the centerpiece of it was to set up an environmental tax-free zone to bring businesses from all over the world into our tax-free zone. Anybody that had got high technology products that were beneficial to the environment in the future. My argument for that was, because of the environmental situation and the way we've got to go in life, if we invest in that now and turn part of Britain into the Silicon Valley of the environment, and all the high technology comes from around the world, it won't cost the government very much in the short term at all. In the long term, these people have become tax generators, but more importantly, as well as growing Britain's GDP, would be really instrumental in saving the planet. So we'd have a technology centre and university in the centre of this enterprise zone, where we try and get a brain drain into Britain, and we interview companies who've got great technological innovations or already in technology, and we give them this tax-free status for a period of time, and perhaps forever a reduced corporation tax, because it's where we've got to go. We've got to grow to Britain's GDP. And if you're going to support any business issue, why wouldn't you support, and I'm talking about from any point of view, but from a tax revenue point of view, why wouldn't you support a business that is brought into Britain and that's going to help to save the catastrophe that's waiting for us on the environment? So I think there's a very strong argument for reduced corporation tax for any environmental business, whether they're part of this enterprise zone that I'd want to set up or not.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And
equally,
yeah.
if I might add to that, there's a hell of a strong argument for putting a penal rate of corporation tax into undesirable businesses like online gambling. Why would we allow online gambling that destroys many, many people's lives to have the same low rate of tax as businesses that are contributing massively to the public well-being?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it does, the country does feel in decline right now, and maybe it has been for years, but the pace has certainly accelerated quite recently. Is there anything that you feel can be done about it? Obviously, you've mentioned some of the easy fixes that could be made, but I mean, what do you feel about trying to navigate an economy, because it has been quite volatile at the moment? So what will be your key suggestions?
Well, there's no short-term fix. There isn't a short-term fix. Anybody that thinks there is are dreaming, because we've got the most disastrous set of circumstances that we've had for 20 years. We've got high inflation, which means high interest rates. We've got a recession coming along that could even be a depression, although I'm not forecasting that, but it's going to be very, very tough times for everybody. The government's balance sheet is worse than it's ever been. So every indicator is negative. We can't float a lot more printed money or quantitative easing into the situation. We can't lower interest rates because of the situation with inflation. So we are in a real mess at the moment, and there's not any levers to pull. If, however, the government had done what I said in March 2020, what we would be able to say to people is, look, we've been through this horrendous pandemic. It's cost the country a fortune, but look at what we're doing to invest in our future. We are going to go through a couple of tough years. It's inevitable. And partly, of course, because of the Ukraine war and because of energy, but it's not all about that. That's part of the picture. But look at what we are investing in the future. Look at what we're doing, attracting, and this can only be done because of Brexit, and it's why I'm a Brexit supporter. This can only be done because of Brexit, but we, the government, are doing this to create massive inward investment into the UK and into the environment. That we can still do. We've lost 2.5 years already, but we can still do it for the benefit of society in 5 to 10 years' time. It's just more difficult now because instead of doing that, what we did was poured too much money into people's pockets. So most of the population that went on to furlough ended up with too much money, and the rules for furlough being really poorly thought through. But then you'd got the other 3.8 million people who were part of the excluded brigade or the forgotten group of people who actually fell through the cracks and didn't get properly supported. So it was an unfair system. It was an over-generous system for some people, an under-generous system by a long way for other people, and helped to fuel inflation. We've lost massive opportunities now for 2.5 years, but that opportunity is still there. But there's not much opportunity to do much about our economic situation at the moment because of the reasons I've just said. Now, one of the issues that the government should look at is productivity. You know, this was a trust policy, growth and productivity, but they talk growth and productivity, but what solutions do they say? You know, we can all say that, you know, oh, growth and productivity, wonderful, it's easy. Well, okay, what are we going to do? Well, my answer to growth was very simple. It was Caudwell pandemic recovery. That would produce growth in the long term. In the short term, no, but in the long term, yes. So that was one point on growth. What do we do on productivity? That's really difficult. And I think the pandemic has made us less productive. All these people that want to work from home, it will decrease productivity because anybody that is capable of working from home and can, and has a brilliant brain or a brilliant mind or inspirational, is not in the office inspiring his colleagues and driving forward a collective mentality of win-win-win-win success and spreading their knowledge and information like we did in Caudwell Group for 20 years while I was growing it. I could not have possibly built the empire that I built working from home, utterly impossible, because I had to inspire people in the middle of a group of people every second of my life. I had to have those people that had been inspired by me and that were bright, inspiring others and, you know, and mentoring people on a real-time basis. You listen to a conversation and you think, he's not handled that right. And then immediately the person's finished the conversation. You bring them over and say, this is what you really should have done. How can that happen with a bunch of people sitting on Zoom calls? It's never going to happen. Can't work. So our productivity will go down, not up. Now, I know the work at home brigade will say the reverse. They don't have to travel, and it's nonsense. And I'm not saying it can't work for some of them. I'm not against work from home for people where it makes sense. And there are people that it does make sense for. We're doing this by Zoom. It makes sense. Neither of us are losing out. We're both winning. We're not traveling. But it doesn't work for the majority of the population. And we need to get back to being a dedicated nation of workers who are striving to succeed. The government then needs to encourage everything that encourages productivity. Now, part of that is definitely automation. And they need to think about how financially they can incentivize companies to invest in the very latest automation, the very latest IT systems, to make human beings to make us less dependent on human beings, and therefore to produce the same quantum of product with less human input. Now, just so I'm clear, crystal clear on this, that doesn't mean mass redundancies. We're now fully employed. And the problem is with Caudwell pandemic recovery as they are at the moment, where would these companies get their employees from? Well, they get their employees from recruiting from the people who are now not needed because we've increased productivity. So we increase productivity with automation and IT. Those people that are no longer needed start working in these new industries that we brought from all around the world into our enterprise zone. It's simple concept. It's difficult to achieve, and that's why governments don't bother, because what they'd rather do is say, oh, we'll reduce corporation tax for the rich down from 45 to 40%. Complete nonsense. I wasn't against the reducing corporation tax down to 19% particularly, but I do think that reduction could have been better used incentivizing people to come to Britain's shores, get more companies here and get more productivity. So anyway, there's my overall thoughts. I could go on about this all day, but that's the short-term version of my thinking.
No, and I think you've made some really interesting points there, particularly around automation as well. And it will give great food for thought for SMEs and entrepreneurs that are looking at the future of work, because they are being encouraged to reduce costs at the moment with everything that's going on. And I think what you've said there is it gives them insight to look towards the future, which is great. Because I know you're very passionate about entrepreneurs and startups and perhaps what the UK can do more for them. And you mentioned about, do you feel that if there was perhaps like a period of grace with tax, for instance, do you think that could be something that would help SMEs right now, John?
Of course, it would help if they're profitable, but it wouldn't help if they're marginal, because the tax relief would be zero because they're not making enough money. But also the country's balance sheet is in for a real tough time. And there are going to be a lot of redundancies in the next year. We are heading into this recession. There's going to be a lot of jobs shed. Now, that in some respects is healthy if we invest in these environmental technologies, because we'll have a workforce in that environmental technology. But if there isn't jobs for the people and we go back to higher unemployment days, it's disastrous for the individuals concerned, but it's also disastrous for the economy, because unemployment benefits and social welfare costs will go up, and it's just really destructive. So, you know, the trouble is the government don't get the balance of actions properly in place. They're just not businessmen, you know, they don't think as a businessman. Somebody said on my social media the other day, oh, it's all very well saying and doing this, but a business is totally different to running the country. Nonsense, complete and utter nonsense. It's exactly the same as my life. My life is about making the most amount of money I can by investing in sensible commercial enterprise that grows my business. And for that, that's Britain. You know, the British equivalent is it's British business. We need to grow British business. And then the social welfare of the country is equivalent to my charitable work. I can't do my charitable work if I don't make the money. The country can't look after its poorer people if we don't grow the economy. It's identical. It's just bigger scale. But in some respects, it's easier because, you know, we can invest massively in inward investment and really grow our GDP. And then when the GDP grows, use that for the benefit of the poorer members of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And some great points there, John. So obviously for our channel, SMEs, entrepreneurs, fast growth businesses, is there any advice you would give them right now trying to navigate through an economy that is so volatile? What advice would you give to them?
Of course, it depends what area they're in, because some of the SMEs will benefit out of what's going on. I mean, everybody's been complaining that it's impossible to find good people. In fact, impossible to find people, because Rishi's policy, I don't want to keep going on about Rishi, but
you're fine.
It's relevant, you know. Rishi's policy of putting too much money into people's pockets, and he seemed to not understand that he was making people too wealthy, and that the supply chain was empty because of COVID. So what happens at the end of COVID? You've got people who've been starved of entertainment, starved of doing things, starved of products, going out there to fill the boots with all of these things. And you've got a supply chain that's empty. So you've got massive amounts of people wanting to spend massive amounts of money and no supply. Well, what can that do? It's only one thing it can ever do, and create inflation. It created inflation, created a mini boom, created high employment, which is a positive thing, of course. You know, there was more people, there were more jobs going back, but then people couldn't find the work. So what we created was a boom that was going to lead to a recession and lead to this high inflation, which is where we are today. Now, what the government need to do is look at how they can help SMEs get through the time that's coming. One thing for sure, SMEs are going to find it. Businesses are going to find it easier to recruit people over the next couple of years. But in the meantime, they really need to keep overheads down. But I do think the government have got to do whatever they can to motivate and incentivize businesses to be more productive, and maybe tax breaks on better tax breaks on anything that is productive, like IT systems, like robotics, automatic systems.
Yeah.
Now, above and beyond that, it's tough. And, you know, businesses that don't survive, you could, and it's a bit of a harsh point, but you could say, well, they shouldn't survive anyway, because businesses have to be capable of riding recessions. It's a fact of life that we get booms, we get busts. Government should be capable of lessening those boom and busts, but they are there, and some people's business become less relevant. And, you know, so businesses are always going to suffer and new businesses are going to prosper. What the government have to do is provide the most stable environment. We've not done that, unfortunately, but the most stable environments for businesses to know what their interest rate's likely to continue and what the state of the economy is likely to remain as. And this boom and bust is very unhealthy for people. And I feel sorry for businesses that were already on the margins with COVID, and now they're going into a recession. But some of those businesses have to go, unfortunately. It's just a fact of life, you know, but the people that survive will come through it stronger. So anybody out there that's really on the cusp, I would say, fight like fury, keep your overheads down, fight through it, because better days are ahead. Well, worse days are ahead, but better days, you know. So, and what happens is, there's an old adage that I've used all my life, which necessity is the mother of invention. And when you face difficult times, and I've faced them, well, because of the economy, 6-7 times in my career, every time you face a crisis like that, you fight with your overheads, you fight with productivity, you push every lever that you've got to be more profitable and to survive. And then when you come through that recessionary time, you're lean, you're mean, and you're really ready to go. So anybody that's feeling a bit depressed or feels that difficult times ahead, yes, there are. There are for some of you very difficult times ahead, but don't despair. Fight like mad. Do everything in your power to keep your business profitable, or at least not lose too much money. And if you can do all that, improve your productivity, improve everything that you're doing, you'll come through it. And when the recession ends, which I forecast might be in about 2 years' time, I'm not saying we'll be in a recession for the whole 2 years. What I'm thinking is that we'll be in growth in about 2 years' time. Interest rates will be coming back down, inflation will be down, and we'll be in a better, you know, in a better state of mind in 2 years' time. And when you get through to that 2 years' time, you've got good times to look forward to again.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. That's great. And so for John, then, any political ambitions?
No, no, my only ambition is to help the government make the right decisions.
Mm,
I could not be a politician because I've got very clear views of what needs doing. I can't toe any party line. I have been a conservative in principle all my life, but it's only a conservative because I follow their general principles and believe in them. But I'm not a loyal, dyed-in-the-wool Tory. I will support any party that I think has got absolutely the right policies for Britain. It doesn't matter who the party is. The Tories have traditionally been that party. I hope they'll be again under Rishi's leadership now. And if they are, I'll remain a Tory supporter. Not necessarily financially, it depends how good a job they do and how much help they need. But, you know, if he does a great job, it's not out of the question that I would support them financially again next time. But, you know, I have to see them do a lot better than they're doing at the moment.
yeah. So what is next for you then, John? What's next for you?
Well, charity is massive in my life. You know, it's most of my life. Caudwell Children helps children with every illness known to man. We're at the moment 654 different illnesses that we help children with. They're all children that would not get the appropriate help without us because the health service don't do it and other charities mostly don't do it. So, you know, if we didn't exist and do this work, it would never happen. For instance, we've got the UK's biggest autism centre, most advanced autism centre, which we built three years ago. In that centre, we can diagnose autism within days and people can get in within weeks. So the average length of time for somebody when they first contact us to get a diagnosis of autism or not autism is 2 or 3 months in total from the time they contact us. It might even be less than that. The NHS take years. On average, kids in the NHS don't get diagnosed for 6 or 7 years, and then there's no pathway to how they get through it. With Caudwell Children, they'll get the diagnosis and a pathway, and they'll get it instantaneously. And this works vital, but there's all the other illnesses, cerebral palsy. I've sponsored the APPG, the parliamentary group for cerebral palsy. We help kids with cerebral palsy and Caudwell Children. We help children with every illness known to man. But I have just set up a new charity. I've also got Caudwell Lyme disease, incidentally, which was there to try and revolutionize the effect that Lyme disease has on people, which is a devastating illness caused by a tick bite. But my new charity that I've just founded is called Caudwell Youth. And we help youths from 11 to 25 years old who are from a bad background. They've either been in care or foster care, but they're vulnerable in some way, vulnerable to becoming criminal, vulnerable to becoming sex slaves, vulnerable to suicide or depression or mental health. And what we do is we put a mentor one-on-one with that person to try and help them through and to be supportive of them. And the statistics are at the moment that if we're not involved, 36% of these people will go on to offend or re-offend. And if we are involved, only 1% will. The saving to the government on this is millions and millions. The ratio of how much the government saves compared to how much I spend is about 50 to 1.
Right.
But if I spend £10,000 of my money helping these kids, and that's how much it costs incidentally per child, so each person costs me about £10,000 a year, it saves the government maybe up to £500,000 a year. So the savings are colossal, and it's something I'm very excited about because we can grow this to help thousands and thousands of kids over the next year or two. So that's very exciting. But of course, I've got all my business excitement as well. We've got One Mayfair, which my whole objective from day one has been to create the world's most prestigious apartment building with 30 really amazing apartments, amazing architecture on the outside, amazing facilities inside, and amazing interior design. And I'm very self-analytical, so I don't make these these statements just, you know, superfluously, or it's a throwaway comment. It is my goal to make it the world's most prestigious apartment block. And at the moment, I'm on target to achieve that. It's stunningly beautiful on the outside, stunningly beautiful on the inside, or will be, because it's shell at the moment, not even shell at the moment. So I'm very excited about that, because what I'll have turned an ugly, very, very ugly, almost derelict multi-story car park in South Audley Street in Mayfair into the world's most beautiful set of apartments. So that's very exciting. I'm doing the same with a building in Cap d'Antibes, which is called La Provençale, which has stood derelict for about 40 years. And I'm now doing a similar model on that, where it'll be a beautiful restored building, very prestigious, right at the entrance to Cap d'Antibes. And I've got also a marine project, which is very exciting, to have the world's first successful, reliable diesel outboard motor for boats. Now that might sound a bit sort of behind the times, because we're moving electric, of course, as society, but for shipping and boats, we can dabble with electric and it will work to an extent, but it's not the solution yet. So for the next 10, 15 years, for sure, we're going to need diesel powered craft. And an outboard motor is what all the single fuel users need. Anybody that's running ships and boats and got these tenders needs a diesel power. And they like outboards because they just clip on. If they break down, they clip on, you know. So whereas an inboard engine is much more complex and difficult. So it's a technology that we've been developing for 10 years. We are very nearing the end of that, and it's looking extremely good. And we know the demand will be phenomenal. So that's extremely exciting as well for the future. So yeah, lots exciting going on business-wise, but equally or even more exciting is what we're trying to do from a philanthropic perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I have to ask, the team have asked me to ask you this question from reference in the book. Have you ever been tempted to bring back the wig, the syrup, or the Irish jig?
Well, you know, when I look back to the syrup, I think, what on earth was I thinking of? I don't want any hair now. Even if I had hair, I'd probably shave it all off. You know, it's a nuisance. It slows you down, you know. I mean, I've never had the luxury of having good hair anyway, so I don't really know what it's like. But I even resent having to shave my head, you know, because it's just wasted time. I even did think about maybe having some laser therapy to get rid of it. No. You know, if I ever brought back a wig, I think you could say that I've gone utterly senile.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. And just to reference again, John's new autobiography, Love, Pain and Money, The Making of a Billionaire. You'll be able to get access to that directly below this interview. But John, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure being here with us.
And a pleasure to see you again, Scott.
Thank you, John. And to our audiences, from all of us here at Elite, we wish you a fair goodbye.